Another day. Is there much to discuss? Yes, of course, because we've had an emergency press conference. There seem to be quite a few of those recently. What's it about this time? Well, of course, it's about Rwanda. Let me just step back for a minute. How often have you done something for a boss or a friend or a member of the family that you know, frankly, is just a complete waste of time? It's not going to achieve anything, it's unproductive, it might waste a bunch of cash, but you do it anyway. We've all been there. Here's the thing about this whole Rwanda policy, the whole strategy. It was supposed to be a deterrent. But let me suggest to you that actually what it really is, it's just a dead cat strategy. And I think I've got a little picture on here of, now, don't worry, it's not a real one. It's a furry cat. But the symbolism of that, you see, you've looked at it. You've wondered, what on earth is that? It's distracted you. It's taken your mind away from the real issue of the day, which is that tens of thousands of illegal migrants are coming across the English Channel every year. Now, how long has the government been working on this dead cat strategy? There it is still. Just remind ourselves, a year and 3/4, they've been talking about this, and here we are, December 23, almost 30,000 migrants have come across this year. The cost of those 30,000 is well over £1 billion in just 1 year. But no one's really been talking about that. Where's the discussion about, well, how do we process the backlog faster? Where's the discussion about how do we stop the illegal working? Do you see, everybody's been talking about Rwanda. And yet it's not a deterrent in my view. Why would it be a deterrent? And we've actually now got the proof from Mark White's interviews with migrants. Migrants in Calais, they're laughing at the idea. The chance of a few hundred, possibly 1,000 being sent to Rwanda out of 30,000, you'll take the punt, won't you? The dead cat strategy. Imagine if all of that money, that time, the brains, the expertise and the wisdom in Westminster, oxymoron possibly, the wisdom in Westminster, they're focused on getting rid of the backlog, stopping the illegal working. Maybe that's a better use of their time, their effort, and their money. To my mind, it's not a deterrent. It's a complete distraction, complete waste of time. So that's my question to you folks. This extraordinary strategy, is it a deterrent or is it just a waste of time? Email me, farage@gbnews.com, or tweet using the hashtag Farage on GB News. Well, I'm delighted to fantastic guests in the studio. To my right, Philip Blond, former advisor to David Cameron, director of the ResPublica think tank, and also Fadi Farhat, a senior legal consultant at Gulbenkian Andonian lawyers. Gentlemen, a very good evening. Thank you. I'm going to turn to you first, Philip. So, I mean, you've got serious experience from the Cameron days of the Conservative Party. This is not Plan A, it's not Plan B. Is it Plan W, Z? I mean, where is it in the spectrum of a disaster?
Well, the disaster has been ongoing for quite some time. The collapse of Conservative support from the heady days of 2019 is the long disaster, if you will, and this is but the latest iteration. Where we are now is that the Conservative Party are polling circa 20%. Now that reads into one of the most catastrophic electoral disasters that one can imagine, possibly heading toward one of the greatest ever, certainly worse than Blair's victory in 97. So we're looking at something where they could be under 150 seats. With the latest polling after this more recent debacle could push them even below 100 seats. That's where the Conservative Party is now currently.
But Rishi Sunak was appointed as the grown-up in the room, the man of competence, who would get stuff done, and he had his pledges, he's delivered one of his 5 pledges, but he did say that he would stop the boats, and here we are 11 months later, and
well, you can understand why. So I think Boris has many merits, but being organised and moving from kind of principle to action isn't perhaps one of them. So you had kind of Boris's how do we put it, inability to act and organise. Then you had the trust budget fiasco. So you understand why people went for competence.
Yeah, but going back to Boris, when Boris introduced this Rwanda policy a year and 3/4 ago, I mean, he foresaw that the lawyers would attack it, but he said it was worth the effort.
Look, deterrent is needed. It worked for Australia when they finally got a radical deterrent strategy in Australia under Tony Abbott. It worked.
Correct.
And migration stopped.
Yep.
Deterrence needs to be in the mix to deter illegal migration for all the reasons that we know. If Rwanda worked, and if it worked at scale, and if it was uncapped, then it would work as a deterrent.
There's a lot of ifs there, but you've just used the key word uncapped at scale, neither of which, as I understand, is actually part of this Rwanda scheme. It's a few hundred, maybe up to 1,000.
Well, no, there's no cap. So the problem with the Rwanda scheme as currently offered is it isn't the high bar that the Prime Minister or the Home Secretary talked about. Actually, the appeal that is still open under Section 4 of the bill means that what happened in June 2022 when the flight was on the tarmac and every single person on that flight made an individual application to the courts citing mental illness, inability that is still there, and it would be used again. So I'm afraid that appeal, narrow as it is, isn't cut off. So the same thing
let's check that
would happen again.
With Fadi. Thank you for waiting. So you're an immigration lawyer. You understand these things. Philip's point there that, I mean, it's incredibly complex. You read this bill, they say there's lots of notwithstanding clauses. The Prime Minister, sort of slightly frustrated this morning, says it's going to work. This is the toughest ever. And yet, it seems there's a little bit of wiggle room through which many people, maybe all of the asylum seekers, may try to sort of wriggle through.
Indeed, Richard, there's a lot of wriggle room in terms of individual cases, but there's even in terms of the actual overall structure, that's not done and dusted at all. From just putting on my legal hat, it seems to be that this is just a repackaging in treaty form, which is a more serious instrument, but it's just simply a repackaging of the original memorandum. All they've done is reshuffle it and put it into treaty form, but they haven't specifically addressed the factual determination made by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court talked about capacity issues. It talked about Rwanda breaching its previous agreements with Israel and other international treaties, such as the ICCPR. And it talked about, for example, the British police issuing...
But the main point was they ruled that Rwanda was not a safe country.
That's the factual determination. Yeah. And based on these things, what this treaty does is it doesn't address any of those. It just simply says that we are putting into treaty form that Rwanda is going to provide assurances.
That's the new treaty. But the bill that they're trying to get through the House of Commons and then with a lot of hard work through the House of Lords,
yes,
the Prime Minister is saying this is the toughest bill that's ever gone through with regard to immigration, and it will work. And yet, lots of lawyers, almost most lawyers that I talk to, say, well, on individual cases, there's wriggle room.
On individual cases, there's wriggle room.
But it says, what else is there apart from individual cases? Every case is individual.
Yes, so you've always got that as an individual case. In terms of your own individual circumstances, you can always...
But it's not like they apply as a collective. Everyone is an individual case. There's wriggle room for individuals, so the whole thing's a farce. It's a waste of time.
So the entire thing could potentially collapse just on a case-by-case basis, yes.
Just remarkable. 155 million quid, a year and 3/4, and the answer is we're no more advanced. I mean, it's a farce.
It's a farce, and there's always this talk of deterring the smugglers, and I never hear anything about catching the smugglers. So in terms of actual enforcement, where the money can go into real old-fashioned enforcement, there's no talk of that.
In fairness, actually, I mean, Keir Starmer has talked about a greater effort to catch the smugglers. I think actually Boris and Co, Home Secretaries, have talked about that. But in reality, they're incredibly smart. And if you catch one, guess what? Someone else will basically fill that vacancy. I mean, that's what happens in the criminal world, whether we like it or not. I don't think that's the thing. I think Philip's right. It's the deterrent. But you touched on Australia. In Australia, they pushed back, they picked up and they took elsewhere. In my view, the only way this stops, both on the English Channel and the Mediterranean, is when you have the courage to safely pick up and take back to France take back to North Africa. At that moment, the whole thing stops. That requires courageous leadership.
Well, where we are is also, there's also a problem with Section 5. You could still make an appeal to the Strasbourg court. The Attorney General still views that as binding, even because there isn't a clause in Section 5 that says appeals to the Strasbourg court are non-binding. That isn't in the present treaty. So you could have the whole system still invalidated. So there are two serious fundamental legal weaknesses with the bill as it stands.
Which, in fairness, the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, highlighted to the Prime Minister. She got fired for it. Turns out she's right.
I'm afraid Suella has been proven right in many cases. I think she was brave and correct to call out the double standard of policing that we've seen, which is largely because the Metropolitan Police reports to the Mayor of London, not the government. And she was right about calling them the marchers hate marchers.
Philip, thank you very much indeed. Fadi, just finally, where does it go from here? Or is basically this is just an excuse for lawyers to make a lot of money over the next 12 months until there's an election?
Well, perhaps that, but I think we're just going to continue, and I think by the time we get to a general election, I think everything will be unpacked and reset.
It'll be gone, gentlemen. Thank you so much indeed.